Welcome back to Mink Kind podcasts. This is Dr. Jo North returning to our platform. Mink Kind continues to be a reflective space for anyone who wants to stay sane in our demanding world. Our intention is to inspire, motivate and inform people of all ages interested in mental health and well-being. I'll be drawing on 35 years of practice as a psychotherapist, and we'll be looking at research and therapy along the way and talking with other experts in the field so we can draw on their skill. If something affects the mind, we'll be talking about it. So let's get on with today's podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the subject of mindfulness and why it matters and why everybody raises their eyebrows and lets out a deep sigh when I ever mention it, because the truth is that if mindfulness were that easy for us all, we would all be doing it and we would all be totally okay every day. But that isn't the point of mindfulness. It isn't that easy. It is a bit of a challenge and it is a discipline. And so this is why people just let it go, including myself. I've been either meditating or practicing mindfulness since I was about 20, and that is a long time. And even now, I have times when I don't want to do this, when I think it's a waste of time. What's the point? I'd rather just get on and be stressed. But the fact is, that from my own conclusion and from research over the world by experts, including one of the leading experts, Jon Kabat-Zinn, and his excellent book on depression and mindfulness, which I can highly recommend if you are struggling with depression, particularly anxiety is an excellent read, and I've read it many times in my life, and is probably just for you. But there are very, very simple ways to engage in mindfulness, and I want to tell you all about them today, so that mindfulness is your friend, not your enemy to fight against in your mind. And so let's have a definition here. Mindfulness is the act of being aware of what is in your mind at any given moment in time. It is not something mystical, which it is often associated with. But the truth of the matter is that being mindful and meditation has been part of the human beings in the world for millennia. So Buddhism and ancient faiths include a contemplative approach to life. And that involves stilling the mind, and it involves sitting quietly. And there's a good reason for that. It's because it puts you in a more peaceful place and it puts you in a very good frame of mind. It helps you take control and it pulls you back to the minute. It pulls you back to the here and now, and it says, this is your life now. What it is not is a magical solution that makes all your thoughts okay. And I think this is some of the challenge, is that if you've got difficult thoughts in your mind, they don't just go away because you become mindful. In my work as a psychotherapist, we find that helping people be more aware of the contents of their mind is a great step to take in helping them recover from illness, from mental illness, recover from tragic events and disturbing events, and to gain control of themselves. Really, we're not seeking anything other than people feeling they are able to cope with their lives. Anything exciting and enjoyable on top of that is absolutely wonderful and terribly important to us. But the basics are there. How are we regulating ourselves? How are we managing ourselves? How are we balancing our lives? And I always come back to this important fact, that is, that doesn't matter the context. It's how we manage ourselves within that context. And I know that there will be people listening to this podcast who have very difficult experiences going on in their lives. At the same time, there will be people managing stress. There will be people managing families. There will be people managing tragic events and all of these things that will arrive. They will happen. And it's just a case of how we are equipped and how we are able to cope in the minute with these things. So what's really important is we're talking about mind, and like, do we actually even know what that is? You know, is the mind the brain? Is the mind the head? Is the mind something more mysterious than that? Does the mind have a spiritual element to it? Okay, so these are all questions that we may want to consider, but I think from my perspective, reflecting on events, which is what I do all the time and help people to do, let's reflect on events and find out more about them so that we understand them better, is going to be a way forward. And mindfulness increases reflectiveness. And I think you'll find that events in your life are going to be safer and better and more productive if you reflect on experience. People that don't reflect on experience can do really well, but they can end up being just totally reactive. And I think the opposite to reflective is reactive. Neither are wrong. Reactivity isn't wrong. Sometimes we need to react. You know, if someone comes down our drive with a machine gun, we're going to react. We're going to make ourselves safe straight away. If someone's threatening our children, we're going to react. There are many, many occasions, but we become overreactive in our lives. There is no doubt that we currently have an epidemic of overreactivity. And in fact, what we're doing is encouraging our brains to react very quickly. But let's think about that and how we can cure that, how we can make those things better for ourselves. And what I want to leave you with at the end of this podcast are simple, simple ways that you really will be able to walk yourself into more mindfulness. You do not have to sit cross-legged with incense sticks. You know, I know that's a traditional stereotype of meditation. You know, I can live with that stereotype, but it's literally not what we're doing. There's very much a neuroscientific base for mindfulness and being more aware of the contexts of our mind. Today, psychotherapy, all paths lead to mindfulness, whether you're doing cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very much being more aware of the thoughts in your mind, or whether you're doing emotional based therapy, which is becoming very popular and is helpful to us. Being aware of your inner life and your outer life and how they balance is what we are thinking about. And the word is integration. We're integrating our inner and our outer, and we are integrating the different aspects of the brain by giving it a little bit more attention. So I meet a lot of people who are very afraid of their own brains or their own mind, as I prefer to think of it. And we have a lot of phenomena, a lot of energy in the mind. And when people are anxious or when they're depressed or when they have OCD, they have a lot of different reactivity in the brain and they experience this in different ways. So it can be energetic senses of the world, or it can be rumination or an excessive thinking, or it can be thoughts that get stuck, or it can be echoing of voices. I literally meet people who are just simply afraid of the phenomena of the mind. And I say this to people that over 40 years of practice, I have never found any aspect of the mind that is not worth our attention. Hopefully, part of this podcast is going to help you feel much more comfortable with connecting with your brain and your mind and therefore your life. So let's start with a really good definition of what is a mind. And I think that you can search the internet if you like, and you'll find so many different definitions that you'll end up being very confused. But one of my favorite definitions is from Dan Siegel, Professor Dan Siegel, who is a neuroscientist and psychotherapist and has written extensively on neuro integration and how we integrate and become more mindful. He's written a book called The Mindful Therapist. He's written a lot of books on parenting, and he is a fantastic resource. So what he says on the mind is that the mind relates to our inner experience and the process of being conscious and aware. So that's really helpful. It is simply this: the mind is being conscious and aware. And the mind can be defined as this. And this is also the thing to hold in mind. It's a process that regulates and manages, if you like, the flow of energy and information within our bodies and within our relationship. It is part of the emerging self and gives rise to activities such as emotion, thinking, and memory. So he refers to our minds as being something very dynamic. He refers to the flow of energy and the management of that. So it's not a static experience. So people who feel sense of flow of energy in the mind, well, that's probably because it's quite a good idea that we have a flow of energy in the mind. So in a way, in becoming more aware, we're thinking about how we're managing the flow of energy. And that flow of energy will include thoughts and feelings and emotions. It's as simple as that. But let's just think of the extensive field of the mind, because I think that in everyday terms, we kind of think of the mind as being part of our brain. And that's actually not true. I mean, the brain is the apparatus of the mind, it's the machinery, if you like, just as the heart is the pump for the body. The brain is the machinery for the body, and it relates to all of the functions of the body, and they're all connected. And the body is connected to the mind through the vagus nerve. And at some stage, I'll be podcasting on the importance of understanding the vagus nerve. We have a theory by Stephen Porges called polyvagal theory that talks about how sensory information from the body is fed into the mind, and how important it is that that nerve that runs up the neck on the left hand side into the brain is functioning and flowing. And so it's all about flow. But what Dan Siegel says is that the mind is both our brain, but it is also seen in our relationships and in the context of our lives. So let me give you an example of that. Here's my favorite example of the mind. You go shopping and you see a shoe shop with the best pair of shoes you have ever seen, and you stand and you're attracted to that. Now, this is a frequent occurrence in my life, but it could be anything. It's what you are attracted to. Let's just say it's this beautiful pair of shoes in the shoe shop. You stand and you stare. And what starts to happen is you start to think, okay, I love those. Do I actually need another pair of shoes? Do I actually afford another pair of shoes? They are crazily expensive or whatever. But the mind is functioning. And those shoes, the attraction to those shoes is an aspect of yourself. It is an aspect of your daily experience, and therefore it's an aspect of your mind. So we find our mind in our social world, we find our mind in our work, we find our mind in our choices, we find our mind in our bodily functioning. So the mind is also the body. The mind is the body and the social world. It's a much bigger aspect of ourselves. And that is quite surprising when you start to think about it. And it may give you more clues into why people like me are always talking to people about managing the context of their lives, because the context of your life will affect your mind dramatically. There is so much in this that we can hardly cover it in one podcast. So I'm going to be talking more about this. But let's give you a really practical application of the use of mindfulness. Let's make it really simple, really practical, so that you will do it. And the point is with this that it's a doing thing in the end. It's not something that you think you've done if you've been scrolling on your phone, or you think you've done if you've been watching the telly, or you think you've done if you've had a drink. You know, that those things are restful and they're ways that you give yourself enjoyment. That is not mindfulness. And so I think it's really important that we understand that. So let's make a really practical application. Let's say that you start your day with a whole load of anxiety, crazy panic. How am I going to do today? Anxiety thoughts. I bet there's an awful lot of people listening to this who have that experience, including myself some days. And let's use a mindfulness example of how to manage that. So you're going to take 5 minutes and you're going to time yourself. And you're not going to try and do anything else other than sit, put your timer on your phone, and do some breathing. So, hand on heart, hand on tummy, breathing in through the nose for 4 and out through the mouth for 4. So, hand on heart really works. Mindful of the heart, mindful of the tummy, because the brain, the heart, and the tummy, I'm always saying they are connected. They all have a brain that all talk to each other. How incredible are our bodies? So busy day, crazy day, 5 minutes out, shut the door, turn off your phone apart from the timer and do your breathing. So let's just do a little bit of breathing here and now. Do it with me because this is how we manage it. This is how it works. So hand on heart, hand on tummy, in for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. In again. 1, 2, 3, 4. And hold and then out for 4. In again. Keep your hand on your heart and your hand on your tummy. 1, 2, 3, 4. And hold and then out for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, what we're doing there, you'll notice the components of this act of mindfulness are that you are slowing down, you are noticing your breathing, and you're giving your mind time to organize itself. So, the next step on from your noticing and being aware of your breathing and sitting quietly and slowing down is that you're just going to listen to your heart for a few moments. So listening, can you hear your heartbeat? Bring your attention in to listen to your heartbeat. Just give yourself a moment now to practice that because it's all in the doing of mindfulness, not the thinking about mindfulness. So hand on heart, hand on tummy, breathing still, and bring your attention to your heart. Can you hear it? Can you feel it? Okay. Notice that what we're doing here is bringing your attention, the functioning of your everyday mind, your cognitive mind. We're pulling it in and we're saying, listen. And then we're going to go and bring our attention to the tummy. Can you hear your tummy? Can you feel your tummy? Okay. See if you can connect and bring the focus of your mind. Bringing your attention in. We're not trying to work at how we're going to solve today's anxieties. We're going to give the brain a bit of space. You have to just believe that giving the brain some space will help you. And then we're just going to wrap this piece of activity up by putting your hands across your chest and stroking your opposite arm. So it's just like cross your arms across your chest and stroke your arms like you're giving yourself a hug. And so the brain actually thinks it's getting a hug when you do that. And it's a very, very useful self-soothing tip, a very, very useful technique for helping yourself feel safe and well in the world. Okay, so features of mindfulness include slowing down, noticing your breathing, bringing your attention in and focusing. You were focusing on your heart and you were focusing on your tummy, and then you focused on a hug, but you could focus on anything. You could focus on a flower on the wall, or you could focus on an object. And sometimes in my sessions, I will give children an egg timer with the sand running through, and I will get them to focus on the egg timer. Just brings their attention in and settles them down from their crazy reactive world that we kind of have going on around us now. So here's some more information to help you feel encouraged in mindfulness, not the aversion from it that people are feeling. Dan Siegel, Professor Dan Siegel of the Mindful Therapist, refers to harmony as being the optimum state for the mind. And this is very helpful to us. And he says that your mind is going to work better in a state of harmony. And I always say to people, it's a bit like what kind of music is playing in your brain. So for me, the panic state or the over anxious of, oh my goodness, how am I going to survive today is probably a very jagged piece of music. Whereas a harmonious state would be a beautiful song. And again, if you want to walk yourself steadily into mindfulness, you might like to start off with a piece of music. Here is a piece of music that brings harmony to my brain. And as the brain is so very habitual, if you chose your favorite piece of music, then you could just simply use that as a trigger for your mindfulness. So, whatever that might be for you, and I'm not even going to try and second guess that it might be a classical piece, it might be a modern piece, it might be a smooth, harmonious piece, but it could equally just be a piece of music that triggers your mind and pushes you into, oh, I know, I'm going to take five and I'm going to let my mind run free for a while. And I really use the idea of harmony a lot. You know, is your mind harmonious? How do we get our mind to be harmonious? We just give it a tiny bit of time. Sometimes it can only have to be 5 minutes. And let's face it, we'll have a lot of 5 minutes in our world, sitting on a train, sitting on a bus, sitting in the car. Waiting in a queue is an opportunity to still ourselves and bring some harmony, connecting up the mind and body. Then we're on the road to mindfulness. It's as simple as that. And you might consider that over the span of your lifetime, you will have had moments of mindfulness. You will have had moments where you actually quite naturally fall into a mindful state. If you watch your children, you may find them fall into a deeply mindful state. We're focusing on one thing, not scattered attention. Nothing wrong with scattered attention. Sometimes we need that. Sometimes we need to be all over the place. But be mindful of right now, I am using my scattered attention to get through my life. So Dan Siegel also talks about the five aspects of the mind, and he talks about the mind as a flowing river, and I find that very helpful. Is your mind flowing? Is it like a wave? You know, so we have this expression called brain waves. And actually, it's sort of we've picked up instinctively on the way that the brain is like a wave going through the mind. So the mind likes certain conditions. And if you're aware of those conditions, you're going to be in a much better place. So here is how he is describing the conditions that the brain likes. We work better under flexible conditions. So if you find yourself stuck with a very, very rigid thought, you know that your brain, the flow of energy is very is sticking. And it happens. Sometimes that has to happen. Sometimes we have to be very determined and very single-minded. But generally, the brain is capable of a great deal of flexibility. And in many psychologies these days, the we focus on flexibility. Flexible adaptation is what is going to get us through rather than being stuck with one state of mind. Notice, I'm going to bring us all the way back to noticing all the time. Notice how you get stuck in your thoughts. It's got to be this way. It should be this way. It must be this way. Instead of, well, maybe I can flex and adapt. Be careful. We don't want to be over adaptive, but adaptability and flexibility are going to get us through an awful lot of difficult conditions. That's the second condition of the brain, that the brain is adaptive. The brain can adapt itself to our best survival. And this is why I think ancient man would have definitely used mindfulness, although probably wouldn't have called it that. It would have just been a function of existence. By the way, when I say ancient man, I mean ancient people, including women. And so what you'll find is the third condition that the brain likes is coherence. The brain loves organization. And notice what happens on those mornings when you wake up in a panic, anxious. How am I going to do today? Or your children might be panicky and anxious. Is all we need is a sense of organization. And that's why I'm always saying to people, get a piece of paper and a pen or whatever it is you use, or your note taker on your phone. Put your modern technology to great use and just organize those thoughts. What are the thoughts that are making you panic? And then we will attend to them. When we've had time to make those lists, we will attend to them. We will prioritize what really needs to happen today. We will engage with what matters for our well-being. Now, as I'm going back to ancient man, mindfulness would have kept him, her, they safe. They would have contemplated what worked about today, what doesn't work about today. How do I avoid the dinosaurs tomorrow? How do I make sure that my children don't get eaten by some kind of monster tomorrow? Contemplation, consideration. That's what we're doing when we're being mindful. And our problem today is we are so crushed by activity that we don't engage. So, the fourth condition of the mind is to notice that we need this energetic flow. We need these waves of energy. We need brain waves. What helps us with our brain waves? For me, it does actually happen to be as simple as a cup of coffee in the mornings, which helps stimulate my cognitive functioning, helps me move a little bit quicker. That's okay, but there may be many things that help you. Another thing that helps me in the mornings is going out into fresh air. That works probably better than the cup of coffee. That stimulation of fresh air. I always go for a walk. I always get up and I always do something. Stretching always helps stimulate that flow of energy, stretching and breathing. So how do we best facilitate our brain? How do we help our brain along? And the other thing is that the brain does prefer a stable state. I mean, it does prefer regularity. It does prefer routine, therefore. And we'll notice this in child development that children thrive and absolutely love to be in a routine. We love to know what comes next. Now, life is not always like that. We can't necessarily know exactly what comes next, but it's good to notice that how can we create that around us, even if we're in chaotic conditions, how can we make the most of that for ourselves? So FACES, that described by Dan Siegel, flexible, adaptive, aiming towards coherence, thinking about the energetic flow, and having a very nice stable state. That's what the brain prefers. And very mindful of the beautiful work of Alan Shaw, who has written many books on affect regulation over the years and part of the Norton series on neuroscience. And he talks about the importance of then interacting with others as a way to develop the brain and keep stability in the brain. That's something to watch for. So with children, they're highly dependent on their interactions with others in order to develop the brain and help the brain grow. That's a total given. You know, we don't stick children in a box and leave them on their own and expect to get good development. Children, we absolutely know, without question, need interactions with confident, connected carers to keep them safe and keep them stimulated. Equally, that need doesn't go away. We need great interactions in our environment for things to go well. And you'll have noticed in my last podcast, when I was talking about communication, and a lot of people will come into the therapy room and say, there's something in my interpersonal life which is troubling me and disturbing me. And I need help with understanding that. And so the most important thing after our interaction with ourselves, after the settlement of ourselves, is going to be our interactions with those around us. And in our interpersonal experience, we are very deeply affected in our minds by interactions with others. So here's a good case of making sure that you feel okay about the relationships that you have. Are you in relationship with people who disturb you and trouble you? And do you therefore need to settle those relationships? Do you need to find better communication skills? And then we're off on another whole field of psychology and psychotherapy. At the moment, what we're focusing on is the inner, the emotional, the thoughts, the feelings and the behaviors of ourselves. And the key is the noticing and the being more aware. And a really helpful tool that I've taken out of the acceptance and commitment therapy toolbox is the noticing that statement. So I noticed that. I noticed this. I noticed that will bring you into a state of more awareness. And therefore, to say to yourself, I noticed that I'm feeling agitated, or I noticed that I'm feeling angry. I noticed that I'm distressed. Starts to utilize another aspect of the brain, which is the noticing brain, which is the brain that gives an increased awareness. So simply using those words is really crucial. And so if you do nothing else out of today's podcast, if you take that with you, just begin to notice. I notice I am noticing. And that is the use of the middle prefrontal cortex aspect of the brain, if you like, the part of the brain that notices life, the observer of life. And the observing brain needs more stillness in order to function well. And the more we observe, the more detail we have, the better the quality of our choices. So we've gone straight in there, right into the depths of the brain here. And I hope that you can take these very simple ideas away and start to use them in your life. So we're understanding that mindfulness is about noticing your thinking. So just keep noticing. So in your noticing, these are some of the things that are going to come to light about your constant thoughts going through your mind. And by the way, we don't ever stop thoughts going through our mind. There is a constant flow of chatter there. And I think that mindfulness often locates chatter that we didn't even know that we had, that's knocking away at our mind. And when we stop to be mindful, sometimes we hear thoughts or we think thoughts that we thought, oh, I didn't really actually want to get conscious about that thought, because there is something there that I'm trying not to think about. The fact is that if a thought is trying to be in our mind, it needs some attention. And the very small thing that you can do to make this okay is to just simply write it down and put it on a piece of paper at one side and say, okay, there seems to be a thought there about something that needs attention. And some of the things that we want to put to the back of our mind are the difficult things. And there are many difficult things that people face in their lives, but decisions and difficult things around finance, difficult things around relationships, difficult things perhaps about what we've got to tell people, difficult things about what causes anxiety. And sometimes it's hard to think the thoughts. In fact, some of I think of our constant busyness today is about unthinking thoughts, not thinking them at all. Mindfulness is a time when thoughts might come to the fore. So perhaps you could reassure yourself that, okay, just write it down and put it to one side and see what you're going to do about calling in help to help you with thoughts that might be difficult. So the mind is constantly chattering to us because it feels it needs to. And it's constantly chattering to us about things that it believes are important to our safety and important to our existence. And this is an everlasting thing. It's a bit like our heart beating. Our heart beats so continuously to keep us alive, and our brain thinks thoughts, it thinks to keep us safe. And sometimes this piece of apparatus called the mind or the frontal thinking lobes can be really over busy and can be stimulated by lots of things like stimulants, alcohol, excessive sugar, can be subdued by these things and can be also run into overload if we've been shocked or upset or traumatized or caused anxiety. The tendencies in this frontal lobe is the planning tendency, the anticipating tendency, the making of the to-do list tendency, the judgments tendency. It's the very logical aspect of the brain. It works for us. There's lots of things about lists and judgments and anticipating and planning that are incredibly useful. So the thing is when it runs out of control, and I know that in ACT that they refer to this aspect of the mind as the over helpful friend, and we need to say thank you so much, brain, for bringing all these thoughts. Now I'm just going to kind of put you straight and stop you there, and literally say stop. We're going to have another form of experience. So that's the sensing mind, or the other side of the brain, the sensory system. I'm now going to give some space to my experiential brain, to my brain that lives in the here and now. And so we have these two sides of the brain. The left side is this sort of thinking, activating, planning brain that's a little bit overused in our world at the moment, particularly stimulated by the very exciting prospect of finding new things online and searching and finding things that are very, very exciting. That's a drug in itself. And we love that. And there's some great things about that. But there's also some very exhausting, very debilitating things about that constant activity that are simply wearing people out. And so the mindfulness is another way of thinking of it, is saying, just going to stop all of that mental activity. And I'm just going to get myself out of this groove, because the mind has these grooves. It tends to get into grooves. You'll have your favorite groove of thinking and this constant cascade of mental events. And I'm just going to walk across the bridge, and I'm going to walk across into the other side of my brain, the sensory side of the brain that's got a hold of the bigger picture, the noticing side of the brain, the observing side of the brain, because we are made to use that side of our brain too. And our problem is that we don't actually give it enough space, and we all need that space. So Ian McGilchrist, who is a brilliant neuroscientist and a brilliant philosopher of our time, has written much about this. And he particularly is interested in the corpus callosum, which is the bridge across to the other side of the brain, and how that we've actually diminished the use of the bridge to move into the right side of the brain and have a more expanded view. And so if you really are fascinated, his podcasts are very, very informative, and certainly one of the philosophers of our time. So he talks about how a bird might be pecking seed out of the grass, but at the same time using its other side of its brain to observe its safety, any approaching predators, and that actually, this alertness to existence and experience. And that's quite a clever way to look at the way that we need to balance out. You will probably, if you started to evaluate your life, you probably noticed, oh, there's not a lot of time for balancing out. Even when I think I'm taking a rest, I'm actually only watching the television or scrolling or something like that. So this is a way to think about this, balancing left and right, balancing sensory integration. Particularly, you could call this entry into the other side of the mind, grounding yourself in the here and now, which is a common expression around mindfulness. So when you ground yourself in the here and now, you use your senses. So you are seeing and observing, you are smelling, you are feeling, you are tasting, and you are hearing. And if you draw in on those five senses, a bit like the hand on the heart exercise, you will find that you are calling yourself into your inner experience. You're feeding the sensory motor aspect of the brain, and you're starting to integrate into the here and now. Instead of this chaotic crashing around in this constant thinking tendency and the constant traffic. We're not decrying the logical side of the brain in any way. I mean, it's a very wonderful thing that's got us to some very wonderful places. We're just saying, let's be really sensible and well balanced, and let's look at balancing out the other side of the brain. So, ways into that. Let's talk about ways into that. So, the sensory system, you might stroke a pet, that would slow you down. You might put on some essential oils and draw the smell through your olfactory sense into the limbic system, and that evokes a feeling of relaxation. That's a very useful way to relax. You might listen to really beautiful, soothing music. You would have this winding down experience. And you might look at, say, something really beautiful, look at a beautiful picture. And it's through these senses that you start to slow the whole system down, one thing at a time. You could use reading as a way to slow your mind, to notice the words and notice what that's doing, how your brain is having to chug along at a slower pace. Do you remember we used to read everything? And that was a wonderful thing. So these are, Jon Kabat-Zinn talks about the pathways into mindfulness, and he particularly talks about slowing down. He particularly talks about muscle stretching. So a great way to just do some really simple mindful exercises is tightening your muscles and relaxing them. That is so effective. Scrunching your hands. Just scrunch your hands right this minute. Right, scrunch, scrunch, scrunch. Make a fist and scrunch. Okay, and then relax. And take a really deep, deep breath. In for 4. And hold. And then out for 4. It's as simple as that. Or you could do that when you're sitting on a bus. You could do that when you're sitting at your desk. You could do that in a meeting. And you're using your muscles to feed into the mind body, the balanced mind, and slow things down. Using your breath. Another beautiful way that we used to use when I used to go on to Buddhist retreats and slow things down and go on silent retreats, and that was a lovely way to slow the mind. But slow walking, really slow pace. Take your time, slow your body down and slow your mind down. So there's lots and lots of ways that you can create the right hormones in your system through slowing things down, not giving quite so much credence to this logical brain and to the constant traffic of mental activity and this cascade of mental events that will forever be going through your mind, but at the same time noticing it. So you could start in the simplest place. And what I really hope you take from this podcast is that you can start from where you are right this minute. You can start if you're sitting or standing or whatever. and just do what you do in a more aware way rather than in this automatic, reactive way to which we have become accustomed. And you will start to make a difference to yourself. You will start to feel yourself existing in a bigger picture. And the quality of your experience of life will increase, your awareness will increase, and your brain functioning will increase whenever you slow yourself down. And you can do this in such simple ways. So when you go to sleep at night, you could just be aware of your breathing. When you wake up in the morning, you could just be aware of your breathing and do some stretching or some fist making or some scrunching of the muscles and relaxing. And you could say, hello, body. Sorry, I've been ignoring you. I am your friend. And then you could give yourself one of those comforting hugs where your arms cross your body and you haven yourself in a hug that says all is well with the world. So mindfulness is intended to help us feel more safe in the world, to feel more secure in the world. That is the function of the brain. The brain loves you to be a little bit more mindful because it knows that you will be more effective. And I hope that you might take from this the idea that both sides of the brain are incredibly useful to you. It's been great to share this with you, and there's lots more to say about mindfulness. Incredibly modern, but incredibly ancient, and so important to our lives. I can't wait for our next podcast, and I hope this is really useful. Meanwhile, take care. Thank you for listening. Check out the next episode on our platform. Don't forget, I'm a Doctor of Psychotherapy, not medicine or clinical psychology. My expertise lies in the field of applied psychology through psychotherapeutic models of practice. This podcast is not intended for diagnosis or treatment of any kind. If you are concerned about your mental health, do consult your doctor, who will guide you. If you are ever in a mental health crisis within the UK, dial 999. In all other parts of the world, check your mental health facilities or turn to someone who will support you.